There's a bunch of bugs. There's a fucking bug on here. Whenever I sit here, because I sit in this hammock to do a lot of reading, but I don't know if you can see the floor here. I can't remember how I position the camera, but there's a bunch of mulch here. That's like, I think it's good for the tree. Our tree's like dying, and the mulch helps the tree live. But the mulch like attracts gnats, which when I'm sitting here and reading the book, I'll turn the pages and the gnats will fly into the pages. And as I turn the pages, they like get squished, you know? And so when I go back through, there's just like a bunch of bloody page ends because all the gnats are getting squished. It's like a graveyard in here. Today we're talking about Tom Lake by Ann Patchett. I picked up this novel off of a recommendation on, I think I saw it on like a spring novel recommendation video or something. Or no, it might have been, I'll put the video on screen. I know which video it was, but I can't remember who it was by. But the cover really stood out to me because I was like, this gives spring vibes and I just want like a happy green book to read. And this was the one to read. This book was very good. I liked it. It surprised me. This is about, here I actually have notes this time. I'm not just going to ramble. This is a cozy, really heartwarming book about family and women. It's basically the story is told in a really interesting way. It's a mother, it's set during the pandemic, but most of it is recalling, or a lot of it is recalling, so you're not actually, like, I wouldn't call this a pandemic book. Like, I feel like you go into that, like, with a certain expectation, you know? And this isn't, like, about being isolated. It feels like the opposite of that. It feels like about being free almost, just because of the setting it's in, like, on a farm, you know? Like, nobody's, like, locked up in a room or anything. This isn't, like, how a lot of people experience the pandemic, like, in a small apartment or something like that. So this is basically a mother and her 3 daughters, and her 3 daughters come home. They're all adults by now. I think one is, like, 25 and, like, in a long-term relationship, and then the other 2 are in various stages of their life, but they're all adults by that point. And they all come home to the farm to spend the quarantine because they don't really have anywhere else to go, and like you might as well be with family at that point. And I thought this was a really interesting concept of sort of having a familial, introspective novel about sort of family dynamics and using the quarantine to sort of do that. Because like this is something like I remember hearing about happen. I know people who, like some of my teachers from high school talked about like during the pandemic going home and being with their parents, you know, and things like that. And it's just, this is sort of exploring feeling like a child again, even though you're not, you know, it's reminiscing in that way. I thought the atmosphere of the book was really well set up. Like I just felt like I was there on this, it's set on a cherry orchard, and I didn't know cherries grew on trees. I don't know why that's so random to me, but like they feel like cherries feel like a bush kind of vibe, you know? I never would have thought of cherries as being trees, but I guess they are. And this whole time I was just like imagining my own mother's like garden. I know like a garden is so much smaller than a whole orchard farm, but it just felt like, I don't know, it just made me feel warm and fuzzy inside. This book is very much about learning to love what you have and letting go of regret in that way, but I think the message, sort of those messages, aren't even told in a way like it's not like our character who's telling these stories is needing to know that, you know, like she already knows that what she has is great. It almost felt like I'm hearing from a mother with real world experience. She's telling me what you have is great. Like she's not learning it herself. She's telling me from her experience. This book is very, like, the premise is simple, but it's done very well. I liked like the flashbacks. I mean, they're not flashbacks. Like that's half the book. It's her telling a story to her children, and it all worked really naturally. Like every time things got interrupted to come back to the present, like it felt like I was actually there with them hearing the story. You know, I feel like this book was so simple, but it sneaks up on you with a lot of its darker and more introspective themes, specifically around climate change and familial pressure and familial expectations, you know, what you're going to do with your life and like what your parents expect you to do with your life. These things aren't like, they're tackled in the book, but they're not like covered cohesively they're not resolved, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And when you bring up things like climate change and I feel like there's an expectation that like if you're bringing up these subjects, like you're gonna bring them up, you know. And this book kind of half brings them up, but I kind of liked that. I was reading online some people saying like it felt like it kind of didn't delve deep enough on some of these subjects, but I thought the way it was done is it felt very real, because you know in real life we don't delve into these subjects, you know. A lot of these conversations, at least the familial expectations part, like sometimes these things come up and you know that you have disagreements on it and you just don't talk about it because you know if you talk about it it's going to lead to an argument, you know. And so I felt like in a sense like when these things came up and then they never got resolved, I wasn't left feeling like that was a bad thing. I felt more so like the overall structure of the book left me feeling very comforted in the fact that this family was strong and had a strong sense of community and love, to where if these things ever came up again, I'd trust them to sort of figure it out, you know? The last part I wanted to talk about was, this is going to be minor spoiler, or not minor, I'm just straight up lying. This is pretty big spoilers. I'll put a time up to skip to if you don't want this. But this last part is sort of towards the end of the book, when our main character, I think her name is Laura. I kind of forget. When it's in first person, I always forget because it doesn't say their name a whole lot. But when she is going back to see Duke at the mental institution he's at, and she has sex with him in the bathroom, sort of this weird, like, it makes you really uncomfortable reading it because you're like, this is not healthy, you know? Like, this is not okay. And, like, I mean, that's the whole point of it, is it's just, like, he's using her, essentially. And one thing when I was reading, and then she conceives from that, she has a child, and then she aborts it. And one thing I was reading through a lot of the comments about this were that scene felt really strange and out of place, and that the abortion felt really out of place in this book. And I would agree, but I think that's the whole point, and I think that's why it worked so well for me. Like, I feel like this, adding a scene like that, and then adding her getting an abortion, it recontextualizes the entire book for me. Because this whole book is about how she has followed a life path that has led to bliss and beauty, and she's essentially living in like the Garden of Eden, you know. She lives in a paradise. She's created a paradise for her children, and she's created a legacy that will lead to happiness and is currently creating happiness, you know. And I think by distilling this back down to her in the bathroom with this one man 30 years ago, it really gets the root of, like, she made a mistake, you know. Like, I get the sense reading back that she regrets having done that, having been with him on that day. I just think when I'm reading about people talking about how it felt out of place, I'm like, that's the whole point, is that she made this mistake, but the fact that she was able to get an abortion meant that one mistake didn't rule her entire life, you know? Like, she was able to continue after that, and literally, like, the next, like, because this happens very close chronologically to her meeting her future husband. And so, you know, having access to that abortion method means that she can go meet her husband and then go live this happy life after. And it really, I liked the way that was done, because it set up the entire book. It set up, this is a successful woman, you know? Like, she is living the American dream. Has these children. They have all grown up great. She's living on this farm. It's wonderful. And so you read the entire book loving this and being like, this is so great for her. I love this. And then you find out right at the end, all of this could have been ruined if there was something in place that made it so she couldn't get an abortion. None of this would have happened if she couldn't get an abortion. And I feel like that is such a powerful, powerful subject to bring up in the third act, you know? And it just comes out of nowhere. But I feel like I didn't know that needed to be in the story until it was. And it elevated it. It took it to another level for me. And I feel like it added a lot of depth to the story where it could have just been one thing, but now it's a bunch of things. That is my review of Tom Lake by Ann Patchett. I would give this book I've never given a star review. I don't know if I like that, but I know there are people who will just skip past everything I just said to see the star review, so I'll put up there for the sake of that. I think if I had to give this a number score, I'd give it a 9 out of 10. Or a 4.5 out of 5, because I think out of 5 stars sounds better. I kind of want to give it higher, but I don't know. A 4.5 to a 5. I'm indecisive. I feel like I really struggle to say things are like 5, because that feels like it's like perfect, and I don't think this is perfect, but even then I can't say what I found wrong with it. It was so joyful. This book just makes me smile. I was about to go turn the camera off, but I just remembered. I'm gonna I think I'm gonna fix up my old bike. I don't know why I'm saying this like I didn't already do it. Okay, I already fixed up my old bike, and this is gonna be the transition to the next scene. But I'm trying to retain continuity here, so just ignore the fact that I wear different outfits in every scene, and pretend like this is all the same day, and then it'll be really nice. Okay. The second book we're going to be talking about is Maurice by EM Forster. I picked up this book because I was looking for... I've never been big into romance books, but I think that's partly due to just not being into straight romance books, which is most of them. The last romance book I read, I think, was Red, White, and Royal Blue, and I liked that. It was a little cheesy, but, wasn't bad in that way. I wouldn't recommend it as, peak fiction, But grab a bucket of popcorn, gobble that shit down. It was good. And this I liked a lot more. A lot more. This was very well written. It's by EM Forster, who wrote A Room with a View and A Passage to India and what else? He's got one other big one. But this guy's basically like a old classics writer, classicist. Not classist. Well, he writes about class, so. This book has a really interesting story. I'm not even talking about the story of the book, but the story surrounding it. The very first page says, begun in 1913, finished in 1914. Dedicated to a happier year. And so this was written in 1913. And this author had written a bunch of huge books. He got famous for all those other books I was mentioning that are now classics. But he was closeted gay, and he wrote this queer romance book in 1913. It's probably one of the first. And this book, it was so delightful to read, and I think the best part about this book is the postword. I forget what it's called specifically in here. It's hard to navigate a book with one hand. It's called the terminal note in here. I don't know why it's called the terminal note. But basically, this book wasn't published till 1970 because he couldn't publish it at his time. He would have been like arrested and shit for crimes against humanity. But it was published in 1970, and that's when he wrote this terminal note. And it's just such a fascinating read. I would recommend saving it till after you finish the book. I think there's spoilers in it. But it's just so fascinating hearing about him talking about his creation of the book and how, like, he isn't sure if it'll hold up to the standards of his other books. I haven't read any of his other books, but he's worried because he doesn't have anybody to, all his normal writing circles, he can't talk to them about this, you know? He can only talk to, I think he said, like, he had like he knew 3 or 4 other writers who knew that he was gay, and he was able to get revision advice on and like feedback on. But other than that, this was mostly written with very little feedback because he just couldn't openly share it for critique or comment. But aside from that, I found it so good, even despite that. The opening of this book, like even just the first scene, the one thing I really liked about this is that it felt so modern without feeling like it's tied to politics and things like that. I feel like queer stories nowadays are sometimes, often for the better, sometimes for worse, are just so often tied to, you know, politics, American politics, in a way that, you know, it just gets tiring after a while, you know? Like, sometimes you just want to see stories without it being about that kind of thing. But just an example of how modern this feels, like, we literally open up, the first scene is Maurice, as we follow him from, like, middle or high school until, like, late 20s, I think, maybe early 30s. I mean, the younger stuff is very short. Like, we see him in middle school for, like, maybe a chapter, and then high school for, like, a chapter. It's mostly college and young adult life. But we open up he's in middle school, and he's receiving sex education. You know, he's getting a sex education from his teacher at middle school, which is just, like, thank goodness they did that back then. If only everyone could get that now. But we sort of see him grappling with this, like, not really knowing his side of this, what he's learning, you know, because he is a gay man, and he hasn't really come into himself yet, or really found out or realized that. But this is sort of his journey of realizing that. The characters in the story I really liked because they didn't feel like archetypes or like even a book for this time. Like, you can tell this is written by a gay romance book written by a gay man, because I feel like none of the characters feel like stereotypes or archetypes in the way I've seen a lot, and they all seem really flawed, you know? Like Maurice, as I'm reading this book, he's annoying, you know? Like, I don't like him. But he grows as a character. I mean, for a lot of the novel, he's just a whiny, like, he's whiny and wealthy and just unaware of how the world works, and he's just kind of a brat. He just has a bunch of money, and he's annoying. But we see him grow as a character as he meets other people, and it was comforting to sort of follow someone's life like that. One thing Forster talks about in his terminal note is how he couldn't get this published at the time unless, like, he talked about how he might have been able to get it published, but he would have had to put some, like, terrible stuff in there, like the gay man would have had to be a pedophile, or there would have had to be rape or something like that. And so this is just a happy book. It just makes me smile to know that he dedicated this to a time that would be happier and where he could actually release it. And, like, I'm living in that time, you know? Like, I'm free to be who I am and just be, you know? And there's a specific quote. I want to read a little bit from the terminal note. I'm not going to read anything spoilers. This is EM Forster talking in the terminal note, so this is his own voice. There is no forest or fell to escape to today, no cave in which to curl up, no deserted valley for those who wish neither to reform nor corrupt society, but to be left alone. It just I feel like this makes me appreciate my life a lot more, and, like, the progress we made as a society, you know, and the fact that I can just be left alone. So yeah, that's Maurice by EM Forster. I'd give it a 5 out of 5. I think this is one of my favorite books of all time. It's definitely the best gay book I've read. Not that I've read a lot of them. It's definitely the most well-written. I'm interested in reading more EM Forster books, but I'm worried that they won't live up to this because this novel just felt so personal, you know? Like, it felt like since he knew this wouldn't be published until later on, like, he could just pour his heart into it, pour his soul into it, and make it his in a way that I'm assuming a lot of his other books probably can't be, because I know some of the other ones are romance, but I'm assuming he's switching around the genders, you know, to make it more palatable to his audience. And this just makes me more interested in writing, like, in my own voice, you know? So, yeah. Maurice by EM Forster, 5 out of 5.